Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya and welcome to TFiR Newsroom. And today we have with us once again Ernest Lefner, Chief Product Officer at Gluware. Ernest, it's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. I'm really excited.
Yeah, yesterday you folks announced Gluware 5. Tell us a bit about it.
Gluware 5 is one of our biggest releases to date. It's got four major components. We released a topology capability, released something called API modeling, which we can talk about, and then Gluware service connectors, which are northbound APIs. And then finally, we made some major enhancements to RPA, robotic process automation.
Perfect. So it's a wide range of updates. Pick the one which is your favorite, and let's go deeper into that.
If I had to pick one, it would be API modeling for sure. So API modeling is the expansion of Gluware out of the CLI space into the interrogated API space. We essentially can take any API onboarding, and with Gluware 5, we're releasing Meraki. It gives us the ability to, like Swagger, onboard those APIs in an automated fashion and then bring them all to you in that same fashion you know and love about Gluware. So you can manage your API-based devices exactly the same way you do with the same benefits you do with your CLI-based devices.
Talk a bit about, of course, when we look at Gluware, you have your own, of course, evolutionary releases, then you have a lot of revolutionary releases, but then a lot of things are also based on either customer feedback or where the market is heading. So talk a bit about the benefit to the customers, or how much was it driven by your customer base and how it's benefit them.
That's interesting that you asked that question. I appreciate that. Topology, one of the new features we've released in Gluware 5, is directly from customers, right? Especially our audit and compliance customers. They're saying, hey, it's kind of a pain in the neck to either buy another tool or potentially have to build all these diagrams by hand. So we build them on. And then a lot of our GSCs as well as the RPA components is the same thing. Customers come to us and they say, hey, we want to manage these types of variables or these kinds of tasks. Can you help by putting that in the development pipeline? And that's where the majority of the expansion of our products come from, direct customer feedback.
And you folks were announced at ONUG, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So talk a bit about your presence there, and once again, when you go back to the community, what are you hearing for them when it comes to network, especially automation space?
So I think first of all, it was great getting back to ONUG. Nick Lippis and I, of course, founded ONUG, and it was one of our first ones back in person, our first fall event back in person. So it was fantastic to see everybody. I can't tell you how great it was to hear what they've been up to and just to hear how folks have been faring. But the big, I think, talk, we had a couple of really great speakers. I think one was the emergence of healthcare and how important network automation is in the healthcare space is something that really resonated. And there's a great recording of that on the ONUG website if folks want to take a look at that. And then second, how important policy as code is coming to the forefront. There's a big working group being stood up around policy as code, and that's something we're focused on, but also the industry, I think, is really making that come to the forefront.
Can you talk a bit about we are in a post-COVID world where we don't talk about networking much. We always talk about other things. But I was at a BMC event and Walgreens was there, and they're like, "What are the biggest challenge you faced when it was like COVID, like in February 2018 or 19?" I don't even remember the year now. He was like, "My biggest challenge was network." Because suddenly we are putting not only a lot of workforce from home, but folks are now placing orders online. They're checking status for vaccines online. So luckily, they had all the processes in place, so the network didn't come down. But we don't talk about it. But you do interact with customers. So talk a bit about the rollout network there and how you have seen things evolve.
That's another great question. What I'd say is, especially having come from a big enterprise background, folks weren't really ready for how much things were going to change after an event like COVID. And many, many, many enterprise customers, they were out there, with maybe 10 to 15% of their workforces working from home at any given time to now being fully disaggregated. So they really didn't have time to bring innovation to that problem. They had to go with what was tried and true and trusted. So they just expanded their infrastructure the way they knew how. And I think what you're seeing now is a relook at that strategy and trying to understand how do you get to some complex technologies like zero trust, et cetera. And I think when you look at companies like McDonald's, right? McDonald's, in 2019, or I think, or very early 2020, rolled out, their digital front where you could order online and pick up and have touchless pickup and the whole nine. And everyone thought it was crazy and all those things were empty. And then, 3-4 months later, they were packed and everybody was using it. It turned out to be the smartest idea ever. And so it's not just about, the people, it's also about the services that they provide and getting access to those services. And one of the things I like to remind people is everybody goes to the cloud, they talk about cloud edge, but no matter what, there are still routers and switches that have to support that environment. And those routers and switches need to be automated. Just because they're hidden from you via virtual layer doesn't mean they don't exist.
One more thing that is happening is that, even if you look at the physical network, cellular, or, everything is software defined, everything has been virtualized. We are not talking about black boxes anymore, proprietary software, everything is mostly white boxes. We're also seeing the emergence of private 5G network, which is enabling a lot of workplaces. So talk a bit about the evolution that is happening in the networking space and what impact it is there going to be on Gluware.
A couple of things. I think you're seeing the continued evolution of cloud. Cloud edge is becoming very, very important. And I think you're seeing the way the network is being consumed is different. And you're also seeing the repatriation of data coming back from the cloud, right? So Gluware is sort of in a really good position where we can help you automate your cloud-based policies, or we can help you automate your on-prem network-based infrastructure. And the comment I made before, I think, is really salient. The number of routers and switches in the network isn't going down because of these efforts. It's going up. Someone's got to automate that infrastructure. And so we kind of make out on both ends of that stick.
I'm just trying to understand from Gluware's perspective, does 5G private network fit into your picture at this point, or this is something totally different work? We're
keeping an eye on 5G. Remember, we're really focused on the Global 2000 enterprise customer base. They're not quite the customer base for, private 5G, but we are seeing it start to nip at the edges. So, we always keep our options open. We take a look at what our customers want. And if we start seeing 5G be prevalent, then we can obviously step in and help automate that infrastructure.
And once again, I'll go back to my BMC discussion. I was there 2 weeks ago, and of course, they're all about mainframe, and I was talking about other more. He said, no, cloud is already, past. Edge is going to be the most exciting thing and most challenging, and also because edge is remote devices. We don't know where they are. We cannot send teams to maintain it. They have to have low latency. Plus, sometimes you cannot send traffic back and forth because of regulations or, once again, the bandwidth. So from your perspective, once again, for your customer base, how much adoption is there of edge at this point?
I think where we have customers that are absolutely dependent on things like response time and application performance. Like, the great example was from a session I hosted at ONUG where FedEx was on board. And FedEx talked about, how they're dispersed regionally, and having cloud edge significantly reduces the latency, which directly, is exponentially responsible for how many packages they process. Where you see businesses that really require that level of performance, you're seeing, I think, aggressive cloud edge adoption. But those use cases are not ubiquitous. And there's not a ton of businesses out there with that same level of requirement. So I think the rest of the businesses are sort of in a wait and see mode. Like, what does that work out from a value prop perspective? How, is it less expensive than a traditional network today? And I think we're still feeling our way out in relation to that.
Since you mentioned about our customer, if you can talk a bit about some of the use cases. I mean, of course, you can name or not name depending on how you feel about them. But where you see that, hey, these customers are doing some really exciting things with Gluware. And then we can also talk a bit about the version 5, how release 5 is kind of helping some of those use cases and customers.
The biggest use cases that bring us in every single time have to do with inventory management, config drift and audit, and compliance. I'd say secondarily is lifecycle management. So in your regulated environments, your hospitals, your banks, et cetera, it's just becoming incredibly difficult to meet your compliance requirements. And so instead of having to do all of that by hand, they're bringing in Gluware. Same thing with hospitals. And then I think the next big one is we're seeing is lifecycle management. Even your do-it-yourself shops are finding that the pre-checks, the post-checks, the management of all the different OSs is prohibitively difficult and just sort of, I don't want to say a waste of time for them, but not within their core expertise, right? And so as a result, they're buying that problem off of their plate with companies like Gluware.
Talk a bit about a lot of use cases where making things easier, offering things like no code, low code to lower the barrier of entry for them, so that they can focus on other challenging problems that they have to do versus network automation.
You're a great straight man. I mean, that's the whole goal, right? At the end of the day, we know that Amazon's out there hiring 50,000 plus developers a year if they can get their hands on them. And those developers aren't falling and trickling down into the network teams like we had expected. And so really the whole purpose Gluware has is to provide that, that 80% of foundational out of the box capability and let the customers do that in a low code, no code fashion, whether they're leveraging the assemblies and config models that we build for them, or whether it's the network RPA and they're dragging and dropping and building their automation. And then there's an underlying IDE. So if you have a developer or two that is savvy and wants to take the Gluware instance to the next level, then that's available as well. But the goal is to free up that engineering prowess to focus on the business level problems. Because if you work at a bank and you're focused on how to talk to a network switch and a router, you've kind of missed the bus, right? You should be thinking about how your technology makes the services out to your customers better.
Ernest, thank you so much for taking time out today, and of course talk about the new release and also the adoption of network automation and how you folks are helping solve problem for a lot of different industries. And as usual, I would love to have you back on the show. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd be welcome anytime.